in the 1920s, they had elders, I guess they called them. One name I can think of, Champy. Anyway, they met in various lodge halls, and then finally in the middle 20s and later on, they went to what they call the Lundstrom House.
Our first place of meeting that I recall was in our own home on the north end of town, 17th and E Street. There was no blacktop road or anything up there in those days, but that was our first place of meeting. I can remember Brother Koch, who was a German brother who was a public accountant. He used to conduct the Watchtower study and the meetings. And that's the time there were still 5 of us younger ones at home. My sister Alice and Eva and my sister Frances and my younger brother Elwood and I were still at home.
And look at all the responsibility those sisters had with their children, because they had big families in those days, and 8, 9 kids. Well, in the middle 20s, they had a real ruckus in the congregation. Well, I don't use that word. We had a division, and the elders of that time, the leaders, didn't want to do the work, the door-to-door. They liked to get up and give talks, Uncle David said, but they would not. And they actually got a meeting together, and they all voted to leave and disassociate themselves from the Watchtower. And kind of sheepishly, my grandmother and Sister Lamson, they weren't too energetic about going and leaving. They had reservations, but they did anyway. So the congregation went into kind of a limbo there until about 1930, when Sister Lamson and her family, children, and my grandmother, Eunice, they said, we don't want to, we want to get back. So they wrote the society.
Time passed a little bit, and we later had meetings at the Lamson residence for a while. And that was the time some of them were living up in the Menashtash Canyon. If you can imagine going to meetings up there, it was very difficult.
The first meeting I ever attended was in the KP Hall above the cafe down there, the Palace Cafe. There was a lodge hall up there, and we met up there. That was the first time I ever went to a meeting.
But then our first Kingdom Hall was on 400 block on North Main Street. At that time there was a barber shop right next door, and we had this little storefront Kingdom Hall, which was about 11.5 feet wide and about 30 feet long. And Brother Lamson, John, and I constructed some homemade benches for the seats. We had a hard time coming up to one that was comfortable. We had about 3 or 4 models before we got through.
It was the nature of the room was so narrow that and the bathroom was down at the end. Well, that was right where the stage was. And the brother had to get up on the stage. Well, there was the bathroom door. And of course the friends, you know, they tried to be discreet about it, but what are you going to do with a little kid crying? And
Our heating equipment was rather primitive. We had a wood stove, which we would have to get down there ahead of time before the meeting come, or it wouldn't be warm in there at all. Of course, it wasn't very comfortable at any time in that Kingdom Hall, but that was our Kingdom Hall and our situation.
And so then in 1950, the brothers started thinking, we got to have a Kingdom Hall. And so my dad and then Joel donated each a lot to where the old Kingdom Hall is now at 11th and Maple. And so that's the first Kingdom Hall that belonged to the local congregation.
That was the one we built, but we didn't have a surveyor up there to determine where the street line was. So we actually had built the Kingdom Hall front out into the street.
One Saturday I was walking down the alley, because I lived in that neighborhood, and I was walking down the alley and I seen all these brothers over there working. And so I got hooked. I just started hanging around with them. And I remember Joel took me out in the service. I owe a lot to Joel.
The way I understood it was Joel was living next door, and he'd get off at work and he'd have to fly over there after work and get the heat going and then go home and get his supper and then come back and start the meeting. And it was hard for him, I'm sure.
You know, Kingdom Halls in those days were perpetually in perpetual construction. They'd get the building framed up, a roof on it, windows in it, and this and that. That's good enough for now. Let's get in there, and that's what we did.
Well, it sure wasn't comfortable and luxurious like we have it today. I mean, we really are in a very posh setting, I believe. But, you know, we just had these funny little rickety chairs, folding things, very uncomfortable. And it would be maybe 20, 30 below outside, and it was cold because it was hard to get the Kingdom Hall warm. So I'd sit there, I'd pull my leg, you'd pull your legs right up under the chair, or sit on your legs with your coat wrapped around you, and babies sitting on you, trying to keep warm and trying to keep comfortable, trying to pay attention. And it was not comfortable. But if you were spiritually hungry enough, you know, you were happy to be there.
And then the floor, of course, was a regular tile, so it was hard. And so these chairs were lightweight, and they'd scoot around. And that's when Joel's children were little, and his oldest, not his second oldest boy, Michael, went to sleep sitting in that chair, just like little kids do today. You know, only they got a nice padded chair to sleep in. But poor Michael, he fell off the chair, and of course he hit the ground, started crying. Well, the chair also went down. Bang! Crash! I know. And the meeting was going on, so. But we were glad to get rid of it. I see Joel brought one to the Kingdom Hall as a specimen, huh?
Yeah, it was, you know, you really had to be spiritually hungry, I thought. And I was, definitely, because I had been to many churches looking for, looking for the truth. I had heard when I was about 7 years old that I had a Heavenly Father, and I guess I was looking for Him because I had been church hopping. And the last church I went to, I learned a special sermon was going to be on soil conservation. And that made me so disgusted. I thought, I'm not here for that. Although I'm all for soil conservation. But anyway, then the booklet came out, and Joel and his wife, Darlene, came by with it. It was on Christendom or Christianity, which is the light of the world. And it just, I read a little bit of it, and it hit me like a bolt of lightning that this is the truth. I was thrilled.
And so the circuit servant came to me one day. He says, "You're the only one left." You know, there's not, I suppose in some congregations here and there are needs like that. You're the only one, brother. Pick up the ball. So, but when Ray Moline came, that was, he gave the congregation stability. But I had a hard time believing that anybody would move to Ellensburg. So here come Ray Moline and Beulah. The activity, the spirituality of the congregation changed. Then Brother Maurice O'Callahan, 20 years later, he came to the congregation, and we were sitting in the elders having a meeting. He kind of paused there, and we wondered, was something wrong with him? And he says, "You brothers need a new Kingdom Hall." And he looked right at us. Well, we've spent all those years fixing it here and fixing it there, and kind of surprised us. Well, he planted the seed, and so we went out and we started looking around for property, and that's what we have today. One of the things that stick in my mind, something that's noteworthy, is the presence of the Spanish people. The only exposure that we had to the Spanish-speaking people who couldn't speak English was every fall we would go out in the service in the Badger Pocket and all around, and we'd find the sheep herders. And they weren't Mexican, they were from Spain. Because the Spanish would probably maybe come up and work, but they'd always go back down to Yakima, and that's where but they had no roots in Ellensburg until lately, you know. And now we have a Spanish congregation.
Well, didn't they tell us just recently in the new system of things, we'll take our personality with us, and it needs to be the new personality, not the old one.
Well, I look back on that, I see, man, the Lord was with us on that stuff, because it really gets intense.
Well, that New Kingdom book we have, the purple one, which I read over and over and over. They say in there that Jehovah's organization doesn't go from bad to good, but it goes from good to better.